Miyamoto Musashi, The Way of the Lone Sword. The Land of the Fallen Samurai. In the 12th year of the Tensho period, when Japan was still bleeding from the wounds of the wars that had torn the country apart for more than a century, there lay a forgotten province nestled among the Miyamoto Mountains. There, where rice fields stretched like golden scars across the weary land, lived a people who had lost more than their crops. They had lost their hope. This was the land of the fallen samurai, proud warriors who once wielded gleaming swords in the service of powerful lords, but who now shuffled their feet along the same roads where they once galloped like thunder of war. The Shimen clan, once respected and feared, had shattered like leaves in the wind when their enemies triumphed. And with their fall, so too had fallen all those who swore fealty to their banner. Among these men stripped of glory was Munisai Hirata, a warrior whose sword had once drunk the blood of countless enemies, but who now languished in a dusty village, teaching swordsmanship to peasant sons who would never wield a true blade. His eyes, once fierce as a tiger's, now held the deep melancholy of those who have seen their dreams turn into nightmares. But fate, that relentless weaver of tragedies and triumphs, had prepared for Munisai a test greater than any battle he had ever faced: the arrival of a son who would bring with him the seeds of a legend, the birth of a demon. The boy who would become known as Miyamoto Musashi was born Benosuke on a day when clouds gathered like dark omens over Mimasaka. From his first steps, there was something different about him, something that made animals recoil in fear and village children avoid his eyes. Benosuke grew large and strong for his age, with muscles that bulged as if forged from iron, and fists that left dents in the wood when he struck hard. But it wasn't just his physical strength that was astonishing. It was the fury that burned in his pupils, a thirst for violence that seemed to spring from some ancient well of rage. By the age of 10, he had already broken the arm of a boy twice his age. By the age of 11, he had beaten 3 teenagers simultaneously until they begged for mercy. By the age of 12, no one dared provoke him anymore. But that didn't calm the storm raging in his chest. It only fueled the frustration of having no one to vent his rage against. Munisai watched his son with a mixture of pride and terror. He saw in him the distorted reflection of his own youth, magnified to proportions that defied comprehension. It was as if the gods had concentrated all the violence of a lineage of warriors into a single being, creating something not entirely human. This boy, Munisai muttered to himself on sleepless nights, will either become the greatest samurai Japan has ever seen, or he will become a demon who will destroy everything he touches. The awakening of the beast. It was on an autumn afternoon, as the leaves fell like golden tears from the heavens, that fate finally knocked on the Hirata family's door. Benosuke had returned home with his clothes torn and blood on his hands. Not his own blood, but that of 3 boys who had made the mistake of insulting the memory of his dead father. "They said you're a fake samurai," the boy growled, his voice already heavy with ancient fury. "They said our family lost its honor when the Shimen fell. They said we're parasites living off the crumbs of glory that never existed." Munisai felt something break inside his chest. It wasn't just the pain of the words. It was the terrible certainty that the moment he had so feared and so longed for had arrived. The moment to pass on to his son the only inheritance he possessed, the deadly knowledge of the sword. "And what did you do with them?" he asked, although he already knew the answer from the signs of struggle on the boy's clothes. "I broke bones until they begged for forgiveness, but it wasn't enough. It's never enough. There's something inside me that screams for more, Father. Something that wants to destroy, that wants to conquer, that wants—" Benosuke paused, searching for words to express the inexpressible. "That you want to touch the sky with the tip of a sword." In that moment, Munisai saw the future unfold before his eyes like a scroll being unfurled. He saw epic battles, legendary duels, a name that would echo through the centuries. But he also saw blood, rivers of blood flowing from his son's hands. "If I teach you," he said slowly, "if I fully awaken the beast that sleeps within you, there will be no turning back. The way of the sword is not just about winning. It is about killing. It is about carrying the weight of every soul you send to the afterlife." Benosuke's eyes shone like war stars. "Then let me carry this burden. Better to be a feared demon than a forgotten ghost." The first lesson. The next dawn arrived shrouded in mist, as if the world itself were holding its breath to witness the birth of a legend. In the small courtyard behind the Hirata house, father and son stood with wooden swords in hand, bokken worn from use, but still capable of breaking bone if wielded masterfully. Munisai had spent the entire night preparing his heart for what he was about to do. It wasn't just about teaching combat techniques. It was about shaping a soul, forging a destiny, creating a monster that might one day turn against its own creator. "First lesson," he said, his voice echoing with the authority of a master who had survived countless battles. "The sword is not a tool of brute force. It is an extension of the soul. He who fights only with muscle will die at the hands of he who fights with spirit." Benosuke held his bokken with a naturalness that astonished his own father. It was as if the weapon had been born in his hands, as if it had been an integral part of his being since the moment of conception. "Second lesson," Munisai continued, assuming a fighting stance that made his muscles tense like bowstrings. "Every movement has a purpose, every strike has a target, every target has a kill. Don't waste energy on flourishes. The beauty of a cut lies in its deadly efficiency." The first clash of wooden swords echoed across the fields like thunder heralding a storm, and in that sound, everyone in the village knew instinctively that something had changed forever, that a new and terrible force had awakened among them. For hours they fought, father teaching through the pain, son learning through the blood that flowed from his wounds. And with each blow exchanged, each technique absorbed, Benosuke felt something grow within him. Not just skill, but an insatiable thirst for perfection that would consume him for the rest of his life. Blood calls blood. The months that followed were marked by a transformation that bordered on the supernatural. Benosuke absorbed each lesson, like dry land absorbs rain, and his skills grew at a rate that defied all laws of human learning. It was as if he carried within him the ancestral memory of 1,000 dead warriors, all whispering their secrets in his ear. Munisai, a veteran of dozens of battles, began to feel something he had never imagined possible: fear for his own son. Not physical fear, though the boy's strength already rivaled his own, but fear for what he had created. It was like having nurtured a baby dragon, only to realize it was transforming into the creature that would one day burn the world to the ground. The other children in the village now fled when they saw Benosuke approaching. Not because he threatened them, he no longer even noticed them, but there was something about his presence, an aura of restrained violence, that made their primal survival instincts scream with warnings of danger. Then came the news that would change everything. A ronin had arrived in the neighboring village, challenging anyone who considered themselves skilled with the sword. He had already defeated 3 opponents, leaving 2 wounded and 1 dead. Now he proclaimed to the 4 winds that there was no one in that wretched region capable of giving him a worthy fight. When Benosuke heard the news, his eyes lit with a light Munisai knew well, the same light that had shone in his own eyes when he was young and thirsty for glory. It was the light of the hunt, of the predator who had finally found worthy prey. "Let me go," the boy begged, but his voice wasn't pleading, it was demanding. "Let me test everything I've learned." Munisai knew this moment would come. He knew he couldn't keep the beast caged forever, but when he looked into his son's eyes, he saw something that terrified him. He no longer saw the boy he had raised, but the legendary man he would become, and all the devastation he would bring in his wake. The first duel. On the morning of Benosuke's 13th birthday, father and son walked together down the dusty road to the neighboring village. It was a journey they both knew would change their lives forever. A farewell disguised as a test, a rite of passage bathed in blood. The ronin waited for them in the center of the village, surrounded by a curious crowd that kept a respectful distance from his blade. He was a middle-aged man with gray hair tied in a bun, scars crisscrossing his face like maps of past battles. His clothes, though worn, still carried the dignity of someone who had once served a powerful lord. "So," he said, his voice carrying the weariness of one who has seen too much, "you sent a child to challenge me?" Benosuke took a step forward, and something about the way he moved made the ronin frown. There was a fluidity there, an economy of movement that only came with years of intensive training, or with innate talent bordering on the divine. "My name is Benosuke Hirata," the boy said, his voice ringing with a confidence that chilled the onlooker's blood. "And I came here not to be tested, but to test myself." The Ronin studied his young opponent with practiced eyes. He saw the perfect posture, the way his fingers curled naturally around the hilt of his sword, the controlled breathing of someone who had already killed, and suddenly he realized he had made a terrible mistake. "How old are you, boy?" 13 years. A deathly silence descended upon the village square. 13 years. Only 13 years, and already he emanated the presence of a master. The Ronin felt a chill run down his spine, the same sensation he had felt moments before battles from which he had barely escaped. The duel lasted less than 3 breaths. Benosuke moved like lightning, cutting through the storm, his blade tracing a perfect arc from the earth to the Ronin's neck. There was no struggle, there was execution. Clean, precise, inevitable. As the veteran warrior's body fell to the dust, raising a small cloud that slowly dissipated in the morning breeze, Benosuke remained motionless, contemplating his first kill. There was no triumph in his eyes, no remorse, only the cold satisfaction of someone who had discovered his true nature. Munisai watched it all in silence and knew he had lost his son forever. The boy who would return home would be but a shadow of what he would leave, or perhaps a shadow of what he had already become. The birth of the legend. News of the victory spread through neighboring provinces like wildfire. A 13-year-old boy had defeated a veteran Ronin in a single blow. Some said it was impossible, that there must be a trick involved. Others whispered of demonic possession, pacts with evil spirits, supernatural martial arts learned in secret temples. But those present knew the most terrifying truth. There was no mystery. Just pure talent, honed by relentless training and tempered by a thirst for perfection that transcended the human. Benosuke returned home transformed, not only by the experience of taking a life, though that too had marked him, but by the sudden understanding of his own destiny. He had been born to the sword as birds are born to fly, and now that he had tasted true blood, he knew he could never be content with the quiet life of a forgotten village. "Father," he said that night as they gazed together at the stars that shone like spearheads in the black sky, "I must go." Munisai had expected these words, but they still hit him like hammer blows to the chest. "Where to?" "To any place where there are warriors worthy of facing, to any place where I can test the limits of what is possible with a sword." Benosuke paused, his voice filled with a determination that made the air around him tremble. "I will become invincible, father. I will become the greatest swordsman the world has ever seen, and when I die it will be with a blade in my hand and my name echoing through the centuries." That night, Munisai wept for the first time since his wife died. He wept for the son he was losing, but also for the terrifying knowledge that this boy would indeed become everything he had promised, and that the price of that greatness would be measured in mountains of corpses. The savage orphan had grown up. In his place, something new and terrible had been born, Miyamoto Musashi, the man who would rewrite the laws of combat with blood and steel. The road of no return. The dawn that witnessed Benosuke's departure was like all the others. The sun rose golden over the fields of Mimasaka. The wind whispered through the bamboo. The birds sang their eternal songs. But something fundamental had changed in the world. A new force had been unleashed, a storm of steel and blood that would sweep across Japan for decades to come. Munisai stood at the entrance to his house, watching his son's figure retreat down the dusty road. He carried only the essentials: 2 swords, some rice, and a heart burning with the unquenchable flame of ambition. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no tears, no promises of return, only the mutual recognition that this moment was an end and a beginning. "Go with the gods, my son," Munisai murmured, knowing his words would never reach the ears that were turning away. "And may the gods have mercy on all who cross your path." Benosuke walked without looking back, each step taking him further from his childhood and closer to his destination. The road stretched out before him like a sleeping snake, winding through mountains and valleys that hid countless challenges, countless opportunities to test his growing skill. He didn't yet know he would become Miyamoto Musashi, the invincible swordsman. He didn't know his name would be whispered with reverence and terror for generations to come. He didn't know he would found a school of swordsmanship that would survive for centuries, or that he would write treatises on the art of war that would be studied by warriors and philosophers until the end of time. All he knew, with the absolute certainty of youth touched by destiny, was that he was born to wield a sword, and that he would not rest until he discovered exactly how far that sword could take him. In the mountains surrounding Mimasaka, the wind seemed to sigh, not with relief, but with anticipation, as if the world itself were preparing for the legends about to be born, for the duels that would redefine what it meant to be a warrior, for the battles that would transform a savage orphan into the greatest samurai of all time. The journey had begun, and with it, a new era in the history of the sword.